Hello, it's my great pleasure to introduce Tom Shakespeare. Tom is a living legend in the area of disability. He has been instrumental in formulating some of the most important ideas that have had a wide impact, not only in Britain, but globally. He's currently Professor of Disabilities Research at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where, among other things, he's helped to develop and evaluate an intervention to help parents of children with disabilities in developing countries. Tom has published widely and has been a public presence, presenting, for example, programs on BBC Radio. He was an author of the 2011 World Health Organization World Report on Disability. His credits go on, and just much too numerous to mention. He is also, importantly, a parent of 2 people with disabilities and a grandfather to a third. He's also a guardian of a man with Down syndrome. We are very fortunate to have him give us some of his wisdom today. So, and for those watching online, please put your questions in the Q&A feature and we can welcome Tom.
Thank you very much, Eva. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in and inviting me to speak to your PURA conference. And it's great to be with you. I'm going to start by reading a poem, which is perhaps not what you expected. But the poem is from a new collection called A Helix of Love. And it's about parents of children with genetic conditions. And given that PURA is a neurodevelopmental genetic condition, I thought it's not such a irrelevant thing. And I strongly, it's not yet published, it's out soon. It's called A Helix of Love. And it's all about using the arts to really support and enable people to think about their experience. So it's called Letter. I see you hiding in the bathroom, red face, blotchy eyes, crying the tears and screaming, "Why us?" in a place that you know no one will hear you. It will get better. You're going to have to fight, though. You'll be fobbed off, patronized, your heart will break into pieces, but she will help you put them back together again. You're not alone. It may feel like it now, right now, but you'll find your tribe, who you'll chat to, and they will know. So they've been where you are too. Milestones may not be hit, but inkstones will be celebrated. Your daughter may not be able to tell you, but she will show you the determination, the stubbornness, the love she has in spades. You're at the start of that journey. You just don't realize yet what an incredible adventure it will be. Sending loves and hugs, your future self. So that's from a collection called A Helix of Love, and that will be out soon. And it's really all about, well, it says a number of things. It says to me how whenever we or a family member are diagnosed with a condition which seems incurable and unhelpable, we are in despair. And at the moment, I work with a lot of people with dementia. And believe me, when they're diagnosed, they feel in despair. It feels like their life is over. And then they realize it's not. In fact, in a way, it's only just begun. Because the diagnosis is a scary, terrible thing, but life is a wonderful thing. And you will have had that life with your children, and I have had that life with my impairments, and disabled people everywhere are having that life. So what I'm going to do is talk for about, I've been given about 30 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes for discussion. And those questions in the room will be reported to me. And as for everybody online, as Eva said, let's put them on the Q&A, and I'll try and answer them. So when I talk to my medical students about what's changed, because lots of things have changed. Some things move at a geological pace of slowness, and other things move very fast. one of the things that's changed is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And Eva has said, and she's right, that, you know, when it comes to her daughter Shesha and many people with PURA syndrome, you know, having the right to work or the right to education or go to higher education doesn't matter much. But what matters to me, yes, you might not achieve all of those outcomes, but you are a rights-bearing subject. You are worthy of respect. And it's that sort of symbolic change from being somebody to whom things are done to becoming a subject in your own right, which is really important. So you've got the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, 2006. You've got the Convention on the Rights of the Child, 1989, which has got its Article 23 about children with disabilities. And I want to say that there's a common theme, which I think we can take from that. First of all, it's moving from the individual medical to the social and structural. We're seeing that the lives we lead and our children lead are not just about having a genetic condition, but are about living in a particular society. That is really important. And if we can change society, if we can make it more inclusive, that is really helpful to our people everywhere. And the second theme, if you like, is listening to people themselves, listening to children and adults with PURA syndrome, with my condition achondroplasia, with all sorts of conditions, listening to people themselves and their parents and their family members, because having been there is really important. Now, I don't have PURA. After we've talked for an hour, I will go about my day. I don't live it like you do. You are the experts because you live the condition day in, day out, forever, and you are the experts. That's really important. But I am the expert on achondroplasia. I can tell you, I've got I'll take a deep breath. I've got a G2A transposition of 0.38 in my FGFR3 gene, or something like that. But that isn't how Eva introduced me. She didn't mention that at all. She said he's a father, he's a grandfather. She said he's a professor. She said he's a broadcaster or whatever else. All of those are important. The genetic change, less important. I think what's really important is I'm a nice bloke and we'll get on well. But that's not how anybody introduces people these days. But listening to people, realizing that they're more than their genes, that's really, really important. And so thank you for listening to me today. Obviously, disability is very variable. I've got more than one genetic condition, in fact. Well, I've got one genetic condition. I'm in a wheelchair because of a genetic condition. And I've also got ADHD, which was more recently diagnosed. So, yeah, boys tend to have more conditions than girls. But what's also true is that if we look at the sociology of disability, mums of disabled children, I'm afraid, are more likely to be single parents. On average, children with disability are more likely to have a parent who's also disabled. And there's a general correlation, not in your case or mine, but more generally between disability and poverty. So let's think about what we need to do to understand childhood disability. The first thing is that there's a real danger of, here's a sociological term, pathologizing, of talking about burden and passivity and grief and how terrible it is. I don't think it is terrible. I think that the constraints on people's lives in a social sense are more relevant than the difficulty of being a parent to a child with PURA or with achondroplasia or whatever else. So let's not pathologize all the time. We can see the difficulties. I'm not saying don't see difficulties, but don't pathologize. Don't talk in terms of the burden of caring, which is the title, literally the title of a book 20 years ago, The Burden of Caring. And, you know, none of us have the burden of caring. We do have sometimes difficult lives, but it's not a burden, it's a joy. because, and here's the other thing, we have to listen to people who live with conditions, because in this case, imagination can be a real danger. Now, I read you some poetry. I think imagination's great, but what do people imagine when they think of disability? They imagine how terrible it is, how burdensome it is, how difficult it is, that disabled lives are hard, that parents of disabled children are amazing and wonderful and very special. No, we are normal. We are like everybody else. You are like everybody else. You are parents first. I am a person first. I'm not the disabled in the corner, and nor are you the terribly wonderful carers over there. We need to get away from using our imagination to speculate about how terrible it might be to be like that. And I think a lot in society, we speculate about how terrible it might be. And I think we need to move beyond that. So when you look at the studies of life with any genetic condition or disability, there have been very few studies which would put the child or young person or person living with it at the center. So I think it's really important to understand from that perspective what it's like. What we know in general about disabled children is that they have a good reported quality of life. So, you know, I'm not saying that life is always easy, but for example, there's a Sparkle study in about 15 years ago, and it was a European-wide study of children with cerebral palsy. And cerebral palsy, there's lots of contractures, lots of difficulties, but these children had a similar quality of life to non-disabled children in all domains, except for schooling, where they did better, and physical well-being, where they tended to do worse. But they had a similar quality of life. There's no association between the severity of the condition and their emotional well-being. Emotional well-being is not being free of symptoms. Emotional well-being is being loved and being supported and being part of things. That is emotional well-being, not, you know, life is hard, but what makes it real is having connection. And it's the same with children with cerebral palsy, children with mobility impairment, children with spina bifida. Pain is associated with lower quality of life for children with juvenile arthritis, for children with cerebral palsy, and so forth. If they have pain, it's difficult. So we must relieve pain, because life being in a wheelchair or life being more constrained is not necessarily a bad life. It can be an extremely good, wonderful life. So I said that a lot of the time it's structural factors. Now, it's for those of you that live in Britain, it's slightly different from those who live in America. And from those of you who live in poorer countries in Britain, it's slightly different again. But it's the inaccessibility of neighborhoods. It's a lack of neighborhood friends. It's not being able to go into friends' houses. All of those make life difficult. So it's not just the intrinsic impairment, it's also the environmental factors, the transport, the support that's available, the economic situation. All of these make a big difference. When I did a project talking to disabled children, children with physical impairments, children with intellectual disabilities, children with a whole range of conditions. And the point we found, we call this life as a disabled child. And we realized straight away, as soon as we met some disabled children, how wrong we were. We're wrong because we thought that being disabled defined them. No, it didn't. And secondly, we thought that there was a disabled child, i.e. one. No, they're all different. Of course they are. We are, they are. Of course people are different. But one generalization that we found, I told you that they didn't want disability to be defining them. So I'm going to read you more poetry. So somebody that we spoke to wrote a poem, and remember, this is a teen. We're all disabled in some way. To some, disabled can mean being abnormal and different. Why can't they see that we're quite normal and similar to them? We're just normal women and men. That's what that person wrote. Not a great poem, but it does express how they want to be seen. They said things like, you should just go beyond disability and look at the person inside. I just tried to ignore it and join in. What they wanted was good family relationships. They wanted to spend time with their friends, not because they wanted their friends to support them, but they wanted companions. They were fearful of bullying, a negative social impact, but they wanted connection. So I talked to you about how difficult a diagnosis is. I won't go on about that. You've been there, you know what it's like. And what I would say is it's variable. There's no one way of dealing with it. Some grieve, some don't. Some have a negative reaction, some leap straight into it. It's all different. There is no one right way. What is the impact on the family? Well, a lot of families with disabled children are poor. One parent gives up work to care for the child. In America, some work by Fujira and Yamaki found more than a quarter, 28% of children with disabilities lived in households below the federal poverty level. And this impoverishment has a particular impact on mothers and single parents. There was time poverty. There was one study which found that parents of disabled infants could be attending up to 10 appointments in 1 week. And I think this is a theme. Doctors, different sorts of doctors, nurses, scans, social workers, educational psychologists, physios, occupational therapists, you name it. There's a theme here of the amount of time it takes to have a disabled child, and of the different people you have to meet. And who is this worst impact on? The parent, who has less time and who forgoes their own personal time, who might have a better shared caregiving, a better relationship with their partner if he stays around. Less time for leisure, but social activities become really important. And here again, the importance of networking. What you're doing through today and this weekend and this conference and these conferences are really important. And what's the most important thing is talking to each other, finding out from each other. The research found fatigue and sleep deprivation, lower back pain because you're carrying people who are heavy, stress caused by uncertainty about prognosis, lack of control, and also needing to advocate, being the advocate for your child with disability. What about siblings? They obviously, as you well know, can be neglected, that the priority is given to the child with disability, that they miss out, but they end up being better people. They may have more insight, more compassion. Along the way, they have the full range of emotions, of course, love, tenderness, resentment, jealousy, frustration, but they are better people as a result. Difficult to say when their life is harder, but you know, I firmly believe that the hardness that we're sent actually grows us as people, because we have to overcome those obstacles. What about parents? Well, caring doesn't inevitably have an adverse effect, according to literature. Parents adapt and cope. They actively manage their situation. They have different strategies. And again, there's no best way of coping. So what's important is not how severe a child's disability is, but its beliefs, attitudes. That's what an ability to cope is about, far more than the nature of the genetic condition. Parents, families need support. They need financial support, practical support, social support. They have coping strategies. They might need time out, places to vent, other interests in life, treats, space, respite care. You can teach people coping skills. So you can teach people about relaxation, about problem solving, and those sorts of things I hope you are including in your schedule, because that's really important. But here's the important thing. The majority of parents achieve equilibrium and cope. And even though their life can be restricted because they have a disabled child, they feel satisfied, they feel glad, they feel love. So there's recently been a whole sociology of acceptance. The physical aspect of caring might be difficult, but it's not emotionally or psychologically harmful. And I just refer you to this Florida study. And the study, the paper itself is called "We're Tired, but Not Sad." We're tired, but not sad. So it was a group of parents in Florida of children with disabilities. I love that. We're tired, but not sad. So what's been called a sociology of acceptance, not chasing the normal, but accepting and dealing with what life throws at you. All the joys. Now, again, for non-disabled people flexing their imagination wrongly, how can we talk about joys? But all the joys of parenting a disabled child. So this mum of a child with autism, I'd be happy to have another autistic child. They're lovely kids. They've really taught me something. They've taught me to look at people in different ways. And in my friendship with Ava, I hear that over and again. The rewards of affection, the rewards of unconditional love, and the pride in a child achievements. And that's really important. When I had to do a talk for, I think it was an audience of 4,000 teachers and educators in Italy, and I had no idea what to say to them. And my friend who has a child with Down syndrome said to me, "Tell them about the gap." And I went, "What do you mean?" She said, "Tell them about the gap." And you probably know about the gap, but I didn't know about the gap. But just in case any of you don't know about the gap, I'm going to tell you about the gap. So in schooling, in education, often the disabled child is being compared with the non-disabled child. The gap between them. The disabled child, the child with intellectual disability, will they close the gap? Will they close the gap? And the point that my friend was saying, forget about the gap. The gap does not matter. What matters is not comparison, but the progress of the individual. And that progress may be very small. It may be not noticed by other people, but you know that they progress. And that's what you want to achieve. That's what you don't want to compare. You want to achieve. And that is the nature of education. We all have different abilities, different levels. We shouldn't compare with each other. A good education is one where you develop and advance. You don't need to worry about the gap. So that's what she meant by telling them about the gap. And I think for me, it was very, very important. You may know all about the gap, so forgive me for telling you again, but don't forget, the gap doesn't matter. What matters is progress. So what's very interesting is that parents of disabled children respond to the challenge of parenting, developing what's called an extended caring role. You might be, Eve is a philosopher. How on earth does she know about feeding tubes and oxygen and all the other things that parents of disabled children know about? That's what my colleague talks about, the extended caring role, administering drugs, ventilating the child, and the confidence that comes with knowing that you can cope. The expertise that you've gathered, the knowledge that you have. And if you lived a whole lifetime with somebody, you know all about that condition. I know, I've just been asked to do a chapter about growing up or living with achondroplasia. I know far more about it because I live it 24/7 for 57 years, whereas others may be great doctors, but they don't live with the condition. Often between parent and child, a deep personal bond, which brings fulfillment. There was a study in Dublin of parents of children with intellectual disability that found that parents became less judgmental, less materialistic, less selfish as a result of parenting a disabled child. Some felt more optimistic. They laughed more. They had a perspective on what mattered, what really matters in life. They had increased self-understanding of what they're capable of. So there's a whole lot of benefits that come with having a disabled child. And I want us to celebrate and remember those. I'm not saying that, oh, that's okay, don't worry about the bad bit. Makes the difficult bit, but remember the good bit. Finding benefits is good for emotional and physical health. It'll make you feel better as people. And yet, if we turn up to many in the medical service, health service, and say about these benefits, they'll say, oh, you're in denial. They're not really benefits. They can't be benefits. You're in denial. Or pathologized in some other way. But that is what people say. So either they're lying or they're denying, or this is real. And I prefer to think, and I'm sure I'm right, that it's real, that people really do get benefits. Now, I don't need to go on about negotiating the maze of services, the advocacy, the negativity of assessments, the postcode lottery, that all my British hearers are nodding their heads, service fragmentation, unclear boundaries, the skills you have to develop in managing professionals. You are wonderful at managing professionals. And remember that maze I told you about before. People, they want to be, stroked, and they want to be listened to with respect. And, it's very difficult. You know much more. Negotiating of services, that maze of childhood disability I spoke about. So in the wider society, what do we find? We find a lot of stigma. A stigma is a major factor. The children who are excluded from parent-child groups, schools, playgroups, birthday parties, or else seen as a sort of what one child of a couple who are parents of a child with disability said, they were seen as a tourist attraction. Oh, look at that strange child, let's stare at them. Or when people behave badly, the negative social judgments, oh, bad parenting, my child would never behave like that. So stigma is what, and I think this is quite interesting. If stigma is a major factor in the social construction of childhood burden, which it is, then can't we change that? Can't we do something about stigma? Can't we educate people that people come in different shapes and sizes, and that if we can demolish stigma, we'll be much better off. What we want is partnership with professionals, where professionals see us as competent, where professionals respond to what we say, believe us, acknowledge us as experts, share their skills with us, trust us, listen properly to what bothers us. Good professionals develop deep supportive relationships. They think in terms of capacity. They think about advocates and negotiation and support, not paternalistic. They break the rules when necessary. They're about justice and fairness, not strictness and rule following at all times. And remember, you are parents, you're not carers. You put your child's needs first, not your own, like every parent. You want child support services, not parent support services. You want service, we all want services to support the child-parent relationship, not substitute for it. People want information. I just said you in that last session, wanting information. Of course you want information. It's very common for you to feel dissatisfied with the parent you receive. It's very important to know as much as you can. And professionals have to be used to that. So I'm going to move towards a conclusion. Before I move towards a conclusion, I want to talk about a project that we developed at the London School, and it's called, well, it was originally called Getting to Know CP, and then it became extended because it was for children in Brazil, of children with Zika syndrome who have microcephaly and lots of issues. And what we found in this project, in the Getting to Know CP project, in all of the projects that gather together under the word Ubuntu Hub. So I'll put that in the chat, Ubuntu Hub. So it's Ubuntu UBUNTU hyphen hub. So Google Ubuntu Hub. What we found in this work was that what really helped parents was coming together, being with each other. That is one thing. And the second thing is called Getting to Know CP, because we wanted to share knowledge. And the knowledge would be things like how best to feed somebody, what best bedding to have, how best to help people sleep, what works for people. So on the basis of evidence and experience, to share that. So coming together in groups, sharing what works. And I think that's why this meeting is really important, because you are coming together in hub, you're coming together in a group, and you're sharing what works. So more of that. And wherever you are, even if you don't have good access to services, you do have good access to each other. Now, I know that PURA is very rare, but that's why we have this wonderful thing called Zoom, and we can connect across continents. Eva is in New England and others are in New England. I'm in London, you're in Cambridge and all throughout the world, but we can connect with each other. So let me conclude, and then we'll look at questions and discussion. So I want to have a balance. I don't want to minimize the difficulties, but I want to advocate for understanding and acceptance. I want us to value your expertise and the work you do on behalf of children. I want to maximize the potential of children. I don't want to over-idealize. I don't want to say you're wonderful, but I want to value the expertise you develop. I want to change attitudes to disabled children, not pity and sorrow, but equal citizenship, the same needs and the same issues as non-disabled children. I want us to have openness to others. I don't want our lives to be dominated by medicine. Sometimes it's important to know when not to pursue a medical path. We want treatment, we want good enough treatment, but medicine won't solve all our problems. I want support to families, not just to or only or specifically to the children, but to the families, being a unit. Because if families cope, then the child will be okay. If families do not cope, the child will be hospitalized and it'll become a problem. But we need to support families to cope. And really important, as you know, in families is cohesion, support from the partner, support with each other, connection with other parents and families, support for the sibling without disability, making a connection so that you can learn, so that you can support each other, so that you can share tips that work, and so that you can make a difference and have the most successful children you possibly can. Always remembering that success does not mean having a PhD. Success means leading a good life. Thank you. Now.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was wonderful and extremely apropos to the gathering we're having. That unfortunately I'm only joining by internet, but that others are having. And I would, who is on the floor there? Is it Liz or
Yes,
Eva?
I am. I'm on the floor, Eva. So is there any questions from the floor here for Tom?
You might be exhausted.
It's been a lot of information this weekend.
Well, information is good, knowledge is power, but each other is the best resource.
Yeah. Anyone? Do we have anything online?
There's nothing in the Q&A.
Okay.
The theme of the conference, Tom, is Together We Are Stronger. So
Yes, absolutely.
That
Absolutely. Yeah,
encapsulates much of what you have said.
absolutely. And I feel, and because you both because you learn from each other and share tips and so forth, but because also it's a very rare condition, and like many, I mean, achondroplasia is 1 in 20,000. I'm sure PURA is less, but it's really important that you can share that.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for the positivity, because I think sometimes we forget and we do get sucked into thinking of things negatively.
Yeah.
But actually, we do need to remember that we do things well.
Yeah, you do things
so
well,
thank you.
and your children are happy.
I'll ask a question that I also asked yesterday in the power session. Do you have any suggestions for when we're in the moment and we're faced with a situation where we need to stand up for ourselves and advocate for ourselves or our children?
Well, I started out talking about rights. So your children have rights. You have rights, your children have rights. And I don't mean that in terms of you versus the system, but we all have rights. We all share those rights. We are all human beings. And if you wouldn't talk to somebody else like that, don't talk to me like that. And understanding that you, the professional or the service clerk or whatever, is having a hard time. Understanding that it is difficult, but you are doing your best, and you are entitled to a better service or to an equal service or to being considered. It's really important. I think that being together, you will learn from each other. So I'm sure of that. It's difficult, isn't it? You take a deep breath and you smile, and you always get your way better if you're friendly. But you probably need some time out. You need to have a little weep about it as well, and that's fine. Best not to have the weep at the head of the queue. At that point, you need to be strong, and you need to. I'm sure you're right when you say advocating for a child. You're not saying I want more. You're not saying I want a better deal. You're saying my child has the right to a better deal. So why don't we see if we can achieve that? And I acknowledge it's really difficult, and I wish you strength. But I think, and you're going to lose some. You're going to lose some. But what we want is for you to win more. And sometimes you're going to have to go away, regroup, and come back the next week. And so you don't have to change the world now. Bit by bit, you're going to change the world, bit by bit. And so you just want a little bit of it. It's a bit like your child and their progress. You just want a little bit of progress. You're not going to solve it all in one. But having the staying power to come back next week and argue and advocate again, patiently, quietly, but never forget, you are a human being. Your child is a human being. We are all entitled to equal respect.
Okay, there is a question in the Q&A. Tom, if you want to read it out loud.
I will read it. So the question is, it's a response from Janet. A response more than a question. When our children are young, we are like our peers. As our friends' children grow up and move away, the difference between what is possible and what is probable grows. And what will happen to our children when we die? Yes. Everybody worries about what will happen to when they die. And so that's why I think we need a better world. We don't just want a better solution for our children. We want a world where there are options for our children, so that when we're not there, somebody else is going to be there for them. And that's what we want, to be there for each other. Eva kindly said I was guardian of Charlie, who's a man with Down syndrome, and his mother has been very clever. I wish I could say, I don't. I'm not the only guardian. There are several of us, but there's also somebody who does his money, and somebody who does his housing, and somebody who does his educational support. So it's not. He's got two brother and a sister. It's not just down to them. That phrase, it takes a village. Well, particularly for a child with Down syndrome or PURA syndrome, as they grow up, it takes more than one. So finding allies, bringing them on board, and not overwhelming any individual with too much. But I'm not in charge of the money. I'm not in charge of the housing, but I am there to be the advocate for Charlie. So to make sure that he is as included as possible and he gets to do what he wants. And so having enough people involved and having people not overwhelmed by the responsibility and knowing and building for our young people, the next generation, that which they're entitled to, and doing our very best that they don't. And I think what's quite interesting, I'm thinking of Charlie again. So, and Charlie's got quite profound Down syndrome, so he barely speaks. But there is a solution. One of his friends has gone in what my friend, his mum, calls Special World. And Special World is separate from the mainstream. And all of the needs are met, but the needs are quite limited. And the thing is with Charlie, he leads a fulfilled life because he participates. So I think there's a trade-off between meeting all those needs and participating. Or not a trade-off, but I don't want to make the mistake of meeting the needs but not having participation. I want to have both. And I want to bring in adults who will be friends of our children. And so we can ensure that as they get to the next stage, they will be included. So I think that may be the only question that I have. Yeah.
Anyone else on the floor? Okay, I think that's it, Tom. Thank you so much.
No,
We
it's
really
been a great
appreciate you
pleasure
coming.
to be with you, and good luck with your work, because it is work, but it's also joy. So good luck with your work and your joy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Everett.